And we have now a session which focuses on global challenges, prevention of organ trafficking, organ trading, and transplant tourism. And it's my pleasure to invite Gia Tomace from Georgia, from the Georgian Association of Transplantologists, to report on the element of global challenges in this area. So, Gia, we are looking forward to your presentation.
Okay. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. Thank you to the organizer for inviting us. So the topic is global challenges. What is the definition of global challenges? It is a major issues of a magnitude that no one institution or organization can address on its own, and they require the pooling and sharing of knowledge across institutions, disciplines, and continents. So major question to be answered is organ trafficking, organ trade, and transplant tourism global challenge? In order to say yes or no, we should determine if the problem has international magnitude, if we fight against the problem alone without international cooperation, if we can do it. So speaking about the organ trafficking, I would like to mention two important 10%. The first one is that only 10% of the WHO estimated need of organ transplantation are performed each year. So insufficiency of organ transplantation is driven by organ shortage, which is the reason of organ trafficking, which, like trafficking in human beings or drugs, is demand-driven. Second 10% mentioned by the WHO is the proportion of trafficked organs out of total transplanted. So, according to our statistics, there are 120,000 new solid organ transplants. 10% out of them is 12,000, which is 33 trafficked organs per day. It's more than 1 organ per hour. A serious consequence of this shortage is that many patients will not have access to the waiting lists for transplantation. And worse still, that a considerable number of patients on the waiting list will die every year without ever getting transplanted. It is calculated that every day around 30 EU and US citizens die while waiting in vain for an transplant. 2015, Policy Department of European Parliament presented interesting study report on trafficking in human organs. The report describes current situation regarding international organ trafficking committed often by transnational criminal networks and developed into a global problem. So there are stakeholders in trafficking operations. Broker, the person who established the criminal network, an intermediary between the organ buyer and seller. Local recruiter, this is a person employed to identify the actual organ sellers. Minders, those are the persons who accompany the recipients during their travel in hotels or safe houses waiting for transplantation. Enforcers, who make sure that organ sellers go through with the contract. Drivers and interpreters. So what is the background and motives of organ recipients? First of all, it's long waiting list, enhancing the risk of dying on dialysis. Not being admitted to the waiting list or being delisted because of health conditions. Seeking a preemptive transplant, not wanting to ask relatives for a live donation, no access to transplantation in the home country, or restricted access to the transplantation because of belonging to an ethnic minority. What are the characteristics of organ suppliers or victims? So they are belonging to a part of population living below poverty line, being in a position of vulnerability, low education level with lack of basic medical knowledge, not aware of potential health consequences. Usually it's young age group, mostly males, often involved in organ removal by fraud or coercion, and from a home country that lacks a legislative system to effectively prohibit trafficking in persons. I'd like to present a short history of global trafficking in organs. The first report on commercial trade in human organs date from 1980s and concerns the selling of kidneys by Indian citizens to foreign patients. It was reported that around 80% of all kidneys that were procured for transplantation in Indian hospitals were transplanted into the patients coming from the Gulf states, as well as Malaysia and Singapore. A first statistical report appeared in The Lancet. It was in 1990, and revealed that 131 kidney patients from the United Arab Emirates and Oman had traveled to Bombay together with their doctors and were transplanted there with kidneys from local paid donors. The authors were not much concerned about the commercialism, but more about the fact that many of recipients had post-operative complications. Things started to change in the period after 2000. The Israeli nephrologist Michael Fledlander reported in 2002 that over 80 Arab Israeli patients had traveled to Iraq to obtain a kidney from a paid donor. However, Jewish Israeli patients were not able to go to Iraq or any other Arab countries, and transplant surgeons from the center in Tel Aviv, as a solution, made arrangements to go together with their patients to Estonia, Bulgaria, Turkey, Georgia, Romania, and Russia to perform kidney transplantations from paid unrelated donors. Further evidence of trafficking in organs, especially in Eastern European region, came out by fact-finding mission to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. The report was based on the visit to Moldova in 2002, stated that several dozen young men had been taken to Turkey, where in rented hospital facilities, kidneys were removed and transplanted, sometimes using coercion or force. So the donors were recruited from Ukraine, Bulgaria, Romania, Russia, and Georgia. At the beginning of 2000, 2 other European countries were found to be involved in the trafficking of human tissues. The State Medical Center in Latvia, it was mentioned yesterday about it. Over the 10 years period, tissues were taken from at least 400 deceased persons. When relatives of the deceased found out that the tissues were retrieved and sold without any valid consent, they informed the police, who started a criminal investigation. And second case took place in Czech Republic, where in the period of 2003-04, employees of local tissue bank sold skin grafts to a Dutch company for a total of $340,000. 6 employees were charged with organ tissue trafficking. So, we decided to speak just about investigated and real cases. And did you know that George Michael has been accused on organ trafficking? I didn't know that. So the information is from internet. It turns out that last Christmas someone gave him their heart. So therefore he was accused in organ trafficking. Now about other interesting investigated cases. The Kurgan trafficking network in India. It was the most extensive trafficking scandals worldwide. According to the police investigators, the trafficking network had been in operation for at least 7 years, and around 500 transplantations may have been carried out. The majority of recipients had been Indian kidney patients, but since 2005, more and more foreign recipients had been transplanted from States, UK, Canada, Australia, Saudi Arabia, and Greece. In many cases, the kidney had been removed under threat or force. In 2013, medical doctors were sentenced to 7 years imprisonment. A lab technician and 2 local recruiters were also sentenced to 4 or 5 years imprisonment. Another case investigated officially is the Netcare trafficking network from South Africa. This hospital has pleaded guilty in an organ trafficking case. At least 109 illegal transplants had taken place at the hospital between 2001 and 2003, involving organ suppliers from Israel, Romania, Brazil, and recipients from a range of countries, with the majority of recipients coming from Israel. Charges were brought against the Netcare Corporation, 2 transplant coordinators, surgeons, nephrologists, and interpreter also. The third investigated case is medical trafficking network from Kosovo. It was also mentioned yesterday, I guess. The illegal transplant activities in this clinic first attracted attention in 2008, when the Kosovo Immigration Service noticed foreigners arriving at the airport carrying letters of invitation to the medical clinic for the treatment of heart conditions. The clinic was not particularly renowned for treating this disease. Upon this, the medical clinic was searched by police, and it was established that the owner of the medical clinic in 2005 made contacts in Turkey to set up the trafficking network. Turkish transplant surgeon, his photo was on the screen today, was contracted to perform transplants. I don't name him also. At least 24 organ suppliers were recruited in foreign countries: Israel, Moldova, Russia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and Belarus, and transported to Kosovo. The recipients were from Ukraine, Israel, Turkey, Poland, Canada, and Germany. And finally, the fourth well-known trafficking network was the so-called Rosenbaum network. The case was investigated by FBI in 1999-2008. Main broker was Rabbi Itzhak Rosenbaum. Initially, both the recipients and the suppliers came from Israel. Later on, the recipients were mainly US citizens. The suppliers were Israeli nationals, mainly immigrants to Israel from Eastern Europe. Investigation resulted in the arrest of 44 people. Rosenbaum was finally sentenced to 30 months imprisonment and confiscation of the criminal proceeds. So on the slide here, you can see the modus operandi of trafficking networks. This figure brings out the already mentioned observation that trafficked organs generally go from the poor to the wealthy, and from the east and south to the west. It also shows the important role of Israel seen until recently as an organ importing or demand country. So on the slide, you can see so-called donor countries and recipient countries. Modes of international organ trade is shown on this. There are 4 types of these modes. The first mode is when recipient is going to the donor's country to be operated them. In mode number 2, it's when donor is going to the recipient's country. So mode number 3 is when both from one country are going to another country. And both mode number 4 is when donor and recipients from different countries are going to the third country. This is a very interesting slide, proceeds of trafficking in organs. And you can see the payment by recipients, which is from 37,000 till 100,000 and more, 160,000. Fees paid to suppliers, which was different, starting from $400 till $30,000. Number of transplants performed, and how much time the network was working. So from this information, it becomes clear that trafficking in organs can become a multi-million-dollar business, especially since such an operation can go on for several years before being detected. Organ trafficking is estimated to generate between 600 million and 1.2 billion in profits per year. So interesting topic is the role of health professionals in organ trafficking. It is a fact that organ trafficking networks can't function without the participation of medical specialists. Apart from being directly involved in trafficking in organs, health professionals may also contribute indirectly and unintentionally to illegal transplants. According to the study report of Policy Department of European Parliament, health professionals who are employed by and intentionally operate within the trafficking network should be considered criminals and punished as such. So, another topic is how to deal with organ suppliers and recipients of illegal transplants. Currently, there is a wide difference of opinion among states concerning the question whether a person who sells an organ should be prosecuted for committing a criminal offense or should always be treated as a victim. Under legislation, the buying of organs is universally prohibited. However, there is as yet no system or obligation for doctors to report returning transplant tourists to the police or health authorities. On the contrary, most doctors would consider such reporting as a breach of professional confidentiality, and in view of the fact that many recipients of illegally obtained organs have serious complications, post-operative complications. So another issue is how to deal with organ suppliers and recipients of illegal transplants. Some countries, yes, the same issue, for example, Canada, are taking steps to take legal action against these recipients by introducing so-called extraterritorial jurisdiction. Yesterday, in the first half of our meeting, this type of jurisdiction was mentioned in this auditorium. That makes possible to prosecute them for committing a criminal act abroad. Again, the current legal instruments do not clearly define under which conditions organ buyers or recipients may not be criminally liable. So we presented that organ trafficking, trade and tourism have international magnitude. Therefore, we can't fight against it alone without international cooperation. Therefore, we have an answer on our primary major question. Yes, organ trafficking, organ trade, and transplant tourism is global challenge. Now I want to speak a little bit about weak link of the chain fighting against organ trafficking. You today mentioned, was your question from WHO guiding principles, and it's written in guiding principle number 3, that adult living persons may donate organs as permitted by domestic regulations. In general, living donors should be genetically, legally, or emotionally related to their recipients. And in the commentary of guiding principle, of the same guiding principle, it's written that many altruistic donations also originate from emotionally related donors, though the strength of a claimed connection may be difficult to evaluate. So, this is the weak link of the chain, at least for Georgia, and I think not only. In 2015, 2 years ago, our parliament adopted change in the law about organ transplantation. And since then, emotionally related person, other than spouse, can be organ donor, friend, godfather, or whoever. From my point of view, this is the most weak link in our legislation to fight against organ trafficking, since our legislation has no tools to prove confidently whether there is close emotional relationship between the donor and recipient or not. So another weak link. We already have patients outside of Georgia asking for transplantation to be performed in Georgia. One pair is from Palestine. Donor is son, therefore it's easy to prove, if not falsified documents. And second part is from Turkey. And donor is friend. Therefore, it's really difficult to prove whether they are real friends or not. This is not only a local problem. In this direction, we do need strong cooperation to avoid organ trafficking. Speaking about this type of problems, I already all the time mention the film Green Card, if you saw it. It's Golden Globe Award winner. A Frenchman, Gérard Depardieu, wanting to obtain the green card to stay in the US, enters into a marriage of convenience with an American woman. And the whole film is how they were contacted by many times by the immigration service for an interview to determine if their marriage is legitimate. So we need similar type of service in order to prove whether emotional relationship between donor and recipient is real or false. So in order to fight successfully against organ tourism, I offer 3 questions concerning our weak links to discuss. Question number 1 is how strong your legislative tools are to determine true emotional relationship among donor and recipient. Another question is, can we transplant non-resident emotionally related donor recipients if emotional relationship is not permitted in their country of residence for organ donation? And third question is how we can cooperate in order to have information exchange about planned transplantations in case of non-resident patients. We must start fight against transplant tourism at home, and we must cooperate and not take the ostrich pose, since nothing is hidden that will not be made known. And then we will have to prove that we are not the part of organ trafficking. I invite all of you to discuss the questions mentioned above. Thank you for your attention.
Gira, thanks for your presentation, and as in the previous sessions, we will discuss this talk at the end of the session, which brings us immediately to the second speaker of this session, which is about the importance of the Declaration of Istanbul Naata Bosaklar from Turkey is going to report on this, and he was involved, like several of us, in this, I think, really key meeting which took place not so far away from here in Istanbul some years ago, a very important declaration which is in the meantime authorized, established and acknowledged in many, many organizations. I think a real key document which is of big importance. So we're looking forward to your report.
Thank you, Chair, dear guests. With the permission of the Chair, I want to do my presentation in Turkish, if you like. Thank you. Evet.
Distinguished guests, welcome. I wanted to deliver my speech in Turkish. Why? Because it's a very important presentation for me. I would like our legal colleagues or lawyer colleagues to, in fact, listen to me in an efficient manner. This has been 30 years since the, in fact, enaction of the law, and we haven't been able to come together with our colleagues from the legal domain as much as we desired. This is our biggest meeting with our professionals from the legal domain, so I would like to, in fact, establish a direct touch with them. Okay, what is the Istanbul Declaration for Transplantation Professionals? It is important for all the human beings. However, it is fortunate that it's an NGO meeting that took place in Istanbul, and all the people, despite the participation of some official figures, are NGO representatives. Why did we need this meeting? Why did we hold this? If you look at the history of transplantation in the world, we first thought about the medical part of it. We thought that it would be enough to deal with that part. We took a step to, I took a step in the transplantation world in 1980. I learned it from our Western colleagues. However, it is not enough to conduct transplantation. You need to find this first. And the unique source of this is another human being. And here you're not responsible for only a medical treatment. You have to find an organ from a living or deceased person. Here, another human being is at stake. Then we came to understand that organ transplantation, it shows that medical part is the tip of the iceberg. It's a huge social phenomena. Law is involved, ethics is involved, sociology is involved. Everything that relates to the society is involved in this process. Well, it's a little heartbreaking. I mean, understanding this, as our Western colleagues learned this earlier. All surgeons, gastrologists or nephrologists were interested in this, and they wanted to kind of present themselves or show off. And here, what we did, in fact, was accumulating people on the waiting list rather than providing a cure. And these lists were taken off the list, not by getting treatment, but by dying one by one. As in Mr. Rahmi's presentation, we conducted 2 operations, and we had 5 new entrants. And when we had 5 treatments, we had 10 more entrants, because there was no such list before. Then that list got bigger, and our pictures started to appear on newspapers for our wonderful jobs. But then people started to accumulate on the waiting list. This phenomenon was experienced all around the world, not just our country. And when you, in fact, learned that there was such a treatment and couldn't benefit from it through a direct system, then we started to see the illegal developments. It is easy to say that it should be legal, but it's not very difficult to talk about ethics when we have a beloved one on the list, because you witness their journey to death easily. Of course, people living in developed countries or affluent people wanted to find their own solutions. First, they thought that it would be enough to keep their country clean. But no matter how developed your country is, your citizen goes to another part of the world and tries to benefit from such an opportunity. And then you also become responsible as a rich world country for your citizens' well-being in another country. Then this solution would be resolved in all around the world, or it wouldn't be resolved altogether. It wouldn't be enough for America or another rich country to solve it by themselves. It's like a hole in a bucket. A hole would be enough to empty the whole water. You can have your sterile environment, but that wouldn't be enough to protect yourself. What about legal precautions or arrangements? No, they wouldn't suffice either, because it's the human being at the end of the world what matters, and they would find their own solutions. So, until Istanbul Declaration, we have gone through many experiences, and we said that we should put a stop to this process. That's why people came together on this platform. The following slides, again, are a summary of what I have said, and we have seen already in Mr. Rami's presentation, and they are more up-to-date than my slides. Then, rather than reiterating these points, I would like to, in fact, summarize it with a sentence. We see that 10 people die in Europe, and advanced Europe, because they cannot find organs. It is, in fact, a very horrible figure. Same in the United States. 10 to 12 people die on the waiting list because they cannot find organs. And here we see a transplantation activity, a very intense transplantation activity, but it's far from meeting the requirements. And we know, again, according to WHO figures, it is 5 to 10% ratio, the proportion of illegal transplantations. When you mention about something illegal, you cannot document it, in fact, documentate. If we know it's 5 to 10%, it will be probably higher than in real terms. What about the figure? It is 10,000 at least, right? On a count number basis, on an individual basis, which means a huge human market, which is, again, a very sad picture. According to WHO, similarly, I in fact covered these parts because we are not talking about a specific country. We're talking about each other. In a country, 40 to 50% of people have one kidney. Everyone went there to benefit from this kidney transplantation, and we couldn't prevent that from happening. So, if you address all of them together, you see that the World Health Organization put this idea forward in 2004, and two institutions came together in 2008, the Transplantation Society and International Society of Nephrology, and as you all know, we had this convention in Istanbul in late April and early May. 170 persons invited, 160 agreed, and 152 of them were able to attend. They were not forced to take part in this meeting. It was not an official mission. However, these people were experiencing it firsthand. That's why they wanted to take part in this event. I have to thank all of them. We are grateful for their efforts, and I would like to, in fact, refer to some of them. There were scientists, there were state officials, there were ethicists, so different people from different disciplines. I want to mention Francis Delmonico. Maybe you don't know, but there were huge debates in the meeting, and we were kind of getting lost. I wasn't at the meeting, and I heard it from other people, and Mr. Delmonico himself summarized it too. If we do not make a decision, we will not leave this room, he said, and that's how he led the group. I would like to, in fact, remember that with respect, and we wouldn't have any declaration at all. Dear colleagues, the declaration there changed many things all around the world. we're talking about 2008. We started to, for example, attach an importance to our declarations, and many guidelines changed after this event in 2008. So it's one of the rare examples which, in fact, start to change the course of legal regulations. That's why I would like to state my gratefulness to all of them. We see developed countries as well as least developed countries, delegations of which came together inside a room. Just imagine how that was possible. All right, now I will make certain remarks, determinations. We had the publications, all of us as IBM publications. However, there were certain determinations after they were published on website and in other platforms. First, it relates to human beings. We said organ trafficking is part of the human treatment process, and we said we will not be able to end this with transplantation from the deceased. Why? Because the number of transplantations increase the list, increase the number of people on the list. Not being on the list doesn't mean that there are no patients. It means there is not any awareness, or there is not enough awareness. That's why we said that the number of the living donors will increase too. Well, I'm a person who dedicated his years to the examination of the deceased. But we should still accept this. If we do not acknowledge this, it will continue to get bigger in an illegal manner. That was the biggest important output of Istanbul Declaration. We said unethical practices are undesirable consequence of the global shortage of organs for transplantation. If we cannot figure this out, we will not be able to figure out the rest of it with policing methods or legal means. Second important determination was that each country should strive both to ensure the programs to prevent organ failure are implemented and to provide organs. So first you need to take care of your own patient. If you do not have an hemodialysis device, then you wouldn't be informed about the number of kidney failures. If you do not have a good detection system, the liver patient will die before making it to the list. It applies to the heart failures as well. You need to have a good health system, and other countries should help each other to take care of your own patients. That is the first thing. You should be able to provide hemodialysis as well as transplantation. It may seem impossible for now, but at least you should establish a target, regarding the next steps when achieving the goal. Another important determination is that therapeutic potential of deceased organ donations should be maximized. You should not say it doesn't take place in our country. They should not limit it to the living donors, because it was not easy to achieve it from the deceased. We know it from the transplant history. First, we used the living donors, and people, a health professional, a surgeon wants to prove themselves, and then we see this transplantation from the deceased require a more systemized approach. It is in fact more difficult than doing it from a living donor. That is why it is in better state in developed countries. Well, there are exceptions like Japan, but there are some important issues there. So, in fact, countries need to work for increasing transplantation from the deceased, and they cannot do it by themselves, and others should be helping them. What do we need to achieve this? We need an important element, which is trust. We need to establish the principles very well. We need transparency, we need the visibility of national list, we need to keep everything under record, because if you're establishing a deceased system, if you're establishing a donation allocation list from the deceased, everyone should know which organ is headed for what direction. If people don't trust you, I think it ranks second. The lack of trust is again one of the most rational reasons for not giving away your organs, you can understand why it is only limited to 23% in Turkey and why 80% rejects it. If you don't know which recipient receives this organ, if you cannot understand the process, then it will be impossible for you to come to terms with organ donation. It is fortunate that the Ministry of Health has this web portal. Everyone is able to monitor it through the screen, and it now sort of gives an idea about our development stage. Here the government's or the state's attitude is very important, and I thank all our health professionals in the Ministry of Health, because we see that this number is going up. It is in fact one step further, one step higher every year. That's why we have to help each other. Countries need to help each other when it comes to
Sayın Kapuas
conducting transplantation from the deceased. Mr. Kapuas is here. They worked around the clock to establish this system.
olmadan olmuyor.
And we need education systems here. We need to emphasize the importance of the coordination, organ coordinator. Our colleague from Iran delegation emphasized it very well. We need to ensure that these coordinators work by understanding the culture of relevant countries. When I received my education at university, I learned courses on transplantation. However, getting donors in ECU or getting donors after brain death was not part of the curriculum back then. Thank God now we have the definition and determinations regarding how we can detect brain death and what should be the likely scenario. So the countries, in fact, involved in this system, in this approach now, know better what to do after brain death. And you need to get training as a health professional to achieve that. If this is an infarctus figure that takes place in the infarction case being hospitalized, then you can save 5 to 6 people. If the physician doesn't perceive it like that, I mean, if a physician says the person is dead now in the ICU, we cannot do anything, then you cannot cover any distance. How will we achieve that? How will we achieve the fact that physicians will be able to report it more? It will be through trainings. Well, we have many declarations, we have many remarks about how to move forward, but protecting the living donor and registering them, in fact, requires a meticulous approach. There's a donor, okay, you remove their organs and treat another individual, but you need to, in fact, make sure that you treat them very well. Their intellectual mindset, their health status, their well-being, I mean, not feeling any pressure. These are all difficult processes, my dear colleagues. If you do it on a living person, you see that it is as difficult as the deceased one, because primum nihil nocere, that is the principle since the Hippocrates. Why do we in fact override this principle? To provide health to people. So we need to examine them well, we need to check their physical status, we need to check their psychological status, and also look at the economic aspects, as they will be, for example, deprived of working hours. Is there any sentencing behind? Any refugee background? How does a person live in this country as of now? We already know of the sociological pressures, and we say that we should never take them as donors if they feel that pressure as covered in the declaration. Why did we need that? Okay, we saw certain movies, TV shows, and media coverage on the TV. when I say organ, for example, a taxi driver always says mafia. So organ, blah, 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 is completed with the word mafia. So organ donation is the most valuable gift for a person, but it is remembered in an adverse way rather than a positive way. So organ transplantation should be all up here, but in terms of its level, it stands very low. Of course, you cannot increase the number if it has this tarnished image. You should take it to the deserved level, which requires collaboration. No one can achieve this by themselves. We need to come together. We need to have group discussions. Some of the speeches might look in vain, or some discussions might look in vain, but it is only possible through collaboration. We should not, in fact, cover any facts. We should always make these phenomena visible and find the solution together. Istanbul Declaration aimed this, and it has achieved this. I don't know whether our legal colleagues will agree, but let me put this forward. Certain laws are not abided in countries. People don't comply with those laws. However, there are certain words, there are certain approaches, and everyone follows them. They may come out of some cultural stuff, but everyone follows them. Istanbul Declaration was not official in that sense. We know that it was the foundation of many guidelines in Europe. It had a very strong impact. It is important to note this to understand our values. If we say something together at the same time, that means it's an important thing. We should never underestimate ourselves. We should come together very frequently. Istanbul Declaration is a very important document. I wanted to acknowledge that, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. for very elaborative presentation on the Declaration of Istanbul. Just for adding to the presentation, in 2013 we had our 5th anniversary of the Istanbul Declaration in Qatar, and hopefully next year, 2018, we're gonna have our 10th anniversary of the Istanbul Declaration in Madrid. It gives my pleasure to introduce Dr. Tariq Fayad from Cairo University, which will present a report about their efforts in fighting against organ trafficking in Egypt. Please, the floor is yours.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for introducing me. It's my pleasure to be with you here tonight. It's my honor to be a part of the ITN, to share ideas and discussions. And my great thanks to Dr. Ayoub Kahfaji and Dr. Raat Abu Zuklar for inviting me to give a short idea about what's happening in Egypt now in 2017. So what are our efforts against organ trafficking? In 2010, the WHO ranked Egypt amongst the 5 top countries of illegal organ trafficking. So there should be a law to prevent this. The law was developed in 2010. The Law for Organization of Transport and Transplantation of Human Organs, as amended and provided by the government in 2010, consisted of 28 articles divided into 4 chapters. According to the law, this is article number 3, it is prohibited to initiate the transplant from Egyptians to foreigners, except for spouses. They should be married for at least 3 years with proper proving documents. So it's not possible anymore that a Saudi guy marries an Egyptian woman, next week he takes her kidney, next week he divorces her. He should marry her for 3 years. The transplantation is also allowed between children of these couples. Transplantation between foreigners is accepted on 2 conditions. They should have the same nationality, approval from their nation as outlined in bylaws. What does it mean, approval from their nation? The agreement of the embassy at least. What about living donation among Egyptians? Transplantation is accepted as a donation between relatives. Donation between non-relatives is allowed in certain circumstances after approval from the Supreme Committee nominated by the Minister of Health. So unrelated is acceptable. What are the conditions? What are the circumstances that allow unrelated? There are many, many. Some of them are medical, some of them are social. But we are concerned with the medical part of the selection. We are not concerned with the political part. This is a national problem. The donor is seen by us and then seen by a psychosocial worker, then the donor advocate, then the committee of the hospital, then the Supreme Committee of the Minister. Donation is accepted only by the free will of the donor and by a written consent in the presence of first-degree relatives, not him only. His relatives should know that he is going to donate. It is also stated that organ or tissue donation is not accepted from children and those lacking legal capacity. I'm not sure about tissue donation and the age of tissue donation, as Dr. Ata has said this morning. But organs, we don't take organs from children below 21 years. They have to be over 21. Under the article, the donor has the right to refrain from donation and cancel their consent before the transfer process. He can say the night of the operation, I am afraid, I don't want. This is his right. It is forbidden to transfer any part of the human body through buying or selling, or in case the transfer of organs or tissues has any positive implications of any kind to the donor or his family. The article ended by a paragraph that prohibits any doctor from beginning a process of transplant if he or she is informed of the above. It is forbidden to initiate the transplant process except after informing both the donor and the recipient about the procedure of transplant and the associated risks. The donor should know the fine details. If a paper comes and say that a woman is exposed to preeclampsia, if she is a donor, we tell her there is an increased risk of preeclampsia. The briefing committee is composed of 3, and they must get documented approval from both donor and recipients or from their legal representative in case of those lacking legal capacity. And what about deceased donation? The law approves transplantation from dead persons between Egyptians for the sake of preservation of human life and treatment. So it has been approved in 2010. This is acceptable only under the condition that the deceased person has recommended that before his death. So his will in a document request according to steps in bylaws. As you know, there are 2 systems, the opt-in and the opt-out. In our case, it's all of us are non-donors except if you say, I want to be a donor. The Supreme Committee, the law established a committee called the Higher Committee for Human Organ Transplants, nominated and related to the Prime Minister. This committee is charged with the responsibility to regulate and oversee all processes relevant to organ transplantation. The committee also identifies, recognizes, and monitors facilities that are licensed to do organ tissue transplantation in accordance with the provisions of the Act and rules of the Ministry of Justice. So you can't transplant in any small hospital without an ICU or without a dialysis unit or whatever. The committee should prepare a waiting list of the recipients who need deceased transplantation according to the priority of registration. The article also stated that the state will sponsor the costs of conducting transplant operations in medical facilities licensed for that, for those eligible by their order in the registry and are unable to pay. If he is unable to pay, so the state is going to pay for him. The issuance of license for the property to practice organ transplants must be based on decision from the Minister of Health upon the approval of the Supreme or the High Committee. The license is taken initially for 1 year, while the property is being observed for applying the regulations and analyzing performance as a result. Afterwards, renewal will be a period of 3 years. So you take a license for 1 year. If you are okay and following the rules, it can be extended to 3 years. First license and each renewal will be for a fee determined by the regulations. Transparency of transplant procedures and results are mandatory as stated in bylaws. There must be a medical committee in each establishment or hospital licensed to transplant human organs. This committee is approved by the higher committee, and its members must be specialized professors who are non-owners or shareholders in the transplant facility. The mission of this committee is to approve the performance of indicated transplant operations. So me as a consultant, I agree about this transplantation. The hospital which I work in has to agree as well, and this is sent to the higher committee. It is noteworthy that none of the committee members should be involved in any way in the transplantation procedures. It is not permissible to make organ or tissue transplant from the body of that person unless his or her death is certainly proved and it is impossible for him or her to return to life. He has to be dead. The decision about the death must be made by consensus of the members of tripartite committee, neurologist, cardiologist, and anesthesiologist, or an ICU personnel after conducting confirmatory and clinical tests necessary to verify confirmation of death according to criteria stipulated by the regulations of this law. Committee members shouldn't be involved in transplantation team. There should be a medical team responsible for the transport and transplantation of human organs in every establishment licensed to transplant human organs. The team must be headed by a director with technical and administrative expertise necessary to manage the transplantation program, to remove obstacles to its implementation, and to represent the program in different places. And what about the penalties? If this didn't happen, what is going to happen? Those who violate the law will be exposed to prison and or financial penalties. Director of the property who doesn't follow the law will be exposed to same penalties. Those who allowed organ transplantation in an unlicensed property can be exposed to jail up to 25 years. Those who do any transplant operation in an indirect way or by forcing the donor or without his will and consent will be exposed to prison and to pay from $5,000 to $10,000. In case of donor death, jail for not less than 25 years. Intermediate persons facilitating the crime will suffer the same punishment. In addition to the above-mentioned penalties, prevention of practice of the medical profession for a certain period, complete closure of the facility if it is not licensed, cancel the license for the facility for a period of 3 to 5 years, or forever if not licensed. And what is this? Is the rule and the law applied? The law is applied. Those who don't apply the law were arrested 6 months ago. Egypt arrests organ trafficking ring. This happened in 6th of December 2016. Egyptian authorities have arrested doctors, nurses, professors suspected of being involved in an international organ trafficking ring. The arrests of at least 41 people on Tuesday, 5th of December, also included organ buyers and middlemen. The Administrative Control Authority announced in December 2016 that it had detected the largest international network in the country for trafficking human organs. The transplants were carried out without following the medical rules and ethics legally required. None of the hospitals and centers involved were licensed to host transplant operations. On July 4th, the Parliament approved the amendments to the law regulating organ transplants. The amended law stipulates penalties for organ traffickers, including fines up to $113,000 American dollar, and imprisonment up to a life sentence if a donor dies. So they are increasing the punishment after this ring, international transplant trafficking ring. And in this slide, I want to show that the law was developed in 2010 when the World Health Organization named Egypt as one of 5 hotspots. When the law has been developed, 100 illegal facilities were closed and only 32 are working. What are we doing today? How many dialysis centers? Ministry of Health, 279. Our population is more than 90 millions now in Egypt, more than 90 millions. So we have 279 centers, belongs to Ministry of Health. Private sector, 340 centers. Total number of patients on dialysis in 2015, almost 39,000 patients. How many licensed kidney transplant centers in 2016? 35. We have 35 licensed centers. 26% of the university, 23 Ministry of Health, 14 military transplant centers, and the private centers, 37% of the centers. How many do we transplant per year? From 1976 till 2011, 10,308. In 2016, 1,209. Very low numbers. How many of them related transplantations? In 2016, 25% of them related transplantations. In 2014, it was a bit higher. It was 50%. Have we started positive steps? Yes, since you are here now, we have started definitely positive steps. Legalizing deceased donation was only made possible by the law after decades of long theological dispute on the definition of death was settled when Egypt's higher religious authorities, represented by the Al-Azhar Islamic institution and the Coptic Church, officially approved it. Because in Islam, death is when you don't have a working heart, when the heart doesn't beat. So now we are speaking about brain death. So this was, the health ministry has trained the medical professionals to diagnose brain death cases with 4 main hospitals selected for the operations to take place. These are the hospitals in the Cairo University, Ain Shams University, Mansoura, as well as the armed forces. And we shared between us and the ICU personnel the protocol for brain death diagnosis, and this is the brain death referral form. And what about the transplant coordinators? Actually, we sent our coordinators here to the ITN to be trained in their courses, and there is this EMPODAT, which is the European Mediterranean, Spanish actually, society for training of the coordinators. And we teach in these courses so that the coordinators become up to date in their knowledge. And thank you.
Thank you for your very informative presentation. If I just would like to have you here on the podium for questions and answer session. Dr. Jihad, please. And also Dr. Bouzoukhlar, please come here for the questions. Just to let you know that before ending this session, we're going to have a closing remarks by Dr. Ayub Kahwechi, and please remain in the room after the question and answer session. Thank you. Please join me. Floor is open for questions, please. Please.
Thank you. Thank you for all your speakers. Just I want to add something which Dr. Tariq said. In the last 3 years, all Arab countries worked on an agreement, and I think now in the final to be a sign about how to prevent trafficking of organs, tissue, and cells, and the other one how to forbid the cloning process. So there will be, not every country has its own anti-criminals laws, but it will be all Arab countries, and that is what may be a nuclear to have a global issue about this in order to combat the organ trafficking. Thank you.
Is it through OIC or it's different? This agreement is under the suspicions of OIC?
What is OIC?
Organization for Islamic Cooperation.
No, it's Arab countries.
It's just Arabic countries.
Arab League, yes.
Thank you.
We finished drafting all, and what these articles Dr. mentioned, most of these articles are in this agreement.
Right, which is great.
Even there's one, everybody knows or see or listened and heard and participate, or he should inform the certain authorities, the concerned authorities, about any illegal aspects of organ trafficking.
Thank you for the information.
This session is mainly talking about organ trafficking. It's very impressive. I just want to ask, any of you can answer it. It's a general question. When we talk about organ trading, and then if we provide incentive to the donors, living donors, example like provide them medical insurance, or if the donors admitted in future in the hospital provide the first-class facilities, do we consider that this is part of the organ trading indirectly?
Thank you for the question. We start from Dr. Bozoklar, please.
I don't think this is a part of organ trading. If it is organized by an institution which is fair, and the incentive is not in whatever actually, which makes his future better or something, I think this is like the Iranian model. I don't think this is. I think we should all look for that to decrease the waiting list.
So can we consider that it's not part of organ donation? Because when we're talking about organ donations, there's supposed to be non-compensations. It must be from truly whether they really wants to donate without any compensation. So because in my country, in Malaysia, we do have arguments in this. Because when we're talking about organ donation, when we keep a word as organ donation, it's supposed to be no compensation after that. So when globally international agreed that probably by giving not direct compensation money, just covered by the medical insurance, like I mentioned before, plus if the donor going to readmit with other medical reasons, we're going to private first-class facilities in the government hospital for these patients, do we really still consider that? That's why if internationally, globally agreed with that, probably this we need to emphasize in the country like Malaysia, that not exactly talking, when you're talking about organ donation, most of us thinking donation is supposed to be non-compensation.
Right, thank you, Professor Bozoklar, please.
It's not easy to decide on what's right or wrong, actually. This is a very complicated issue if it comes to donation and find organs for patients in waiting lists. But I think I agree with you. It's not easy to prevent it. But of course, all these suggestions should be considered. And we have to talk. We have to talk so much about these. But I know that it's not easy. Very difficult issue this is, and we have to discuss so much.
Dr. Jia, please.
Let me say something. While I was reading last few days, I saw a paper in the American Journal of Transplantation, and the title is Incentives for Donors. So it's a growing issue, incentives for donors.
Dr. Jia, please.
Well, there are many this type of articles about incentives, but generally speaking, any type of incentives which can give financial gain is forbidden. The single incentive, it's not incentive, but the compensation should be fair, compensation should be given, like transportation expenses, assessment expenses, hotel expenses, and so on. This is mandatory, this should be done. But other incentives like additional medical insurance or whatever, this is financial gain and supposed to be forbidden.
If I may, okay, go ahead.
I do agree with that. If throughout the process of transplantation and donation supposed to be free, so whether the donor or the recipient cannot afford them, you go for to get the funds. But subsequent, that's why what I'm seeing here is, in future, let's say the donor is going to be admitted to the hospital with other reasons, that if they provide the medical insurance plus any first-class facilities that we are talking about. So if during the process of transplantation and donation, I do agree, there's supposed to be no charge to the donors and recipient, but the subsequent means the incentive and the compensation, whether in the forms of medical insurance or when they admit to the hospital with other reasons, we're going to provide the first-class facilities or not. So if globally agreed, probably, then it's easy to be implemented. For some countries, they are against when you're talking about incentive, because when we put incentive and compensations, people are trying to manipulate. When they manipulate the words, then it's become whether it's really organ donations or organ trading.
It is important to distinguish between compensation and undue incentives or any kind of financial transaction. If you look at the Declaration of Istanbul, what has been accepted in that document is the compensation for legitimate expenses, like traveling and insurance and so on. It's been mentioned one by one. What are the legitimate expenses which have to be compensated? Because we ask people to donate their kidneys based on altruism, but at the same time we don't ask to pay the extra cost which is associated with the donation itself. And that's why the legitimate expenses have been accepted to be compensated. Other questions, please? Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shibani from Libya. I think the main thing we should consider is fighting poverty, prevention of selling their organs. So fighting poverty might be a WHO job in order to create chances or just not to let these poor people selling their organs. And the other thing is, since we know the markets and the places where they sell their organs, we can track them, we can notify them, make illegal trafficking or transplantation is an illegal act. It's a criminal act, and we should notify it to the societies, and then we might consider fighting this problem by just, you know, in a positive way. We notify the authorities, not make maybe some sanctions on the doctors or hospitals or Ministry of Health, that we give them warning. Listen, you have that hospital who have done a few operations illegal, so keep an eye on them and try to avoid that in the future. Thank you very much.
Any comments on this?
Thank you. I agree with you.
You know, we established a reporting system among the Declaration of Istanbul custodian group. Each of us are from different countries. If there is any suspicious case in Iran, my colleague would report to my colleague which the recipients or donors are from that particular country. For example, if someone comes from Iraq, then an Iranian colleague would report it to Iraqi colleague that someone is coming or came here for organ transplantation and trafficking, but based on that report mechanism, we could be able to prevent some of those cases to take place in different countries. And it works among professionals if they want to collaborate with each other, which is really important.
I completely agree with you. Get in touch together with all of us. This is very important. If you feel something, even feel something, we have to make everybody aware of that. Very, very important. And this is not only a medical treatment, as we talked.
Next question, please, the last question, because we're going to have closing remarks by Dr. Kahveci as well. Okay, then please join me to thank our speakers in this session. Now I would like to invite Dr. Kahveci for his closing remarks, please.
On behalf of ITM Platform and Organizing Committee, I would like to express my special thanks to all speakers and chairmen of the sessions for accepting our invitation. I also thank the Congress Organizing Committee for incorporating this joint meeting into the Congress program. And I thank the guests from different countries for participating in this event. And I thank our team from Turkish Transplant Coordinators Organization and Turkish Transplant Foundation and Liver Transplant Society and FLAPTUR organization and other partner organizations. I believe strongly, I do strongly believe that our dedicated studies, meetings, networkings, and collaborative efforts will have fruitful outcomes for humanity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and enjoy your time, few hours before dinner, and enjoy the dinner. And also the last ceremony, presenting the certificates.